for members, project updates.
This meeting is being recorded.
And public comment. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment of privilege and first thank Chief Deputy Russ Nichols for his leadership and as prior acting committee chair. He and I have worked for the past year and a half on this broadband initiative, and he will continue to serve as a chief deputy in this capacity and make broadband a continued priority on his agenda. I also want to thank the Department of Tax, Fee, and Administration for their willingness to let us use their boardroom and their resources today. They've been a wonderful partner over the course of the last 30 days. Jules, with that, we'll go ahead and please call roll call and review the meeting housekeeping items.
Good morning. We'll begin with roll call. Director Bailey Crimmins.
Here.
President Reynolds.
Here.
Chief Deputy Director Miller. Here. Chief Benton.
Here.
Secretary Tong.
Here.
Senator Gonzalez. Senator McGuire. Assemblymember Quirk Silva. Assemblymember Wood.
Here.
A few housekeeping items. There is time allocated at the end of the meeting for public comment. Presenters, please cue Cole to advance your slides. All committee members, please raise your hand to speak. The chair calling on you helps ensure that you are heard. Also, for those using microphones in person, they are very sensitive and easily pick up background sounds. So please be as careful as you can with any papers, jewelry, whatever you have. Madam Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to first ask if there are any committee members who would like to provide some brief comments before we get started on the project updates. Jules, I see none. Oh, yes. Assemblymember Wood.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to make some comments. I'm very concerned about the fact that the CPUC has not received some of the data that we are asking for from the larger carriers. We're asking for subscriber level data that will help us assure that areas that are served are truly served. I'm very concerned that right now it appears that the majority of carriers or ISPs have provided the data. However, the providers that provide service to the majority of Californians have not. Hence, smaller carriers and ISPs are providing the data that's been required by law, and the larger carriers are refusing to do that. It's important for us to know if these areas that the carriers are saying are served are truly served. It's important for us to be able to then correlate that information to with our federal partners so that we can ensure we're getting the resources we actually need. So it is troubling. They had a deadline. They missed the deadline. They had an extension, and today is another deadline. And I'm very, very concerned that this is going to hinder our efforts. There'll be the same arguments. It's proprietary. It's privacy. Blah blah blah. The reality is, this is information that's going to be directly reported to the PUC. It's not meant to be public, and so I think those are not valid. This bill, particularly my bill, was signed into law. It is in statute, and the carriers are simply ignoring it. And I think it's going to hurt us in the long run. And I hope that we can actually do something to push this effort forward and get exactly what we need from our requests. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments from any of the committee members? All right. With that, we'll go ahead, and the first agenda item is the executive
Madam Chair,
report.
I believe President Reynolds raised her hand.
Oh, sorry, President Reynolds.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chair, I was a little bit late with the hand raise. I just wanted to briefly thank Assemblymember Wood for his comments and note that I'm very supportive of them. I didn't want anyone to, if I didn't speak up, I didn't want anyone to interpret my silence as not being in support. I really appreciate his statement of the issue that we're grappling with the data requests that we have made. It was entirely accurate. We have data requests out and some of the carriers have not provided. I also wanted to reiterate that, yes, we do understand confidentiality is a concern, but the PUC is very experienced in protecting confidential information. We have mechanisms to ensure that proprietary information is kept confidential, and this data is really essential to the state, critical to have up-to-date, on-the-ground, granular information to guide the investments that we're making, and to ensure that federal dollars are coming to California and that they're being maximized and appropriately targeted. So this is really critical to our success here, and I appreciate the Assembly members' emphasis of the issue that we're facing right at the moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments? All right, I see none. We're going to go ahead and start with the first agenda item, the executive report out. Mr. Mark Monroe.
Yes, good morning, Chair and committee members. Mark Monroe with Department of Technology. Wanted to, we can go to the next slide here. I just want to cover a few points of review. Last month, we announced the 10,000-mile map for the broader network that's been delivered to Caltrans so that they can start their pre-construction work on that. And we are working towards posting that map, kind of a static version of that map on our MMBI website by, I think it's scheduled for this next Monday. And then following that, similar to what we've done in the past, we will be working on a dynamic version of it that will allow people to dial in more and kind of see the specific routes in terms of how they interact with other roads and such. Next slide. And the other point you wanted to mention in terms of procurement, I think everybody's been tracking that we signed contracts for the procurement of fiber and related materials in May, and in the kind of some of the next components we've been looking at are the huts, the repeater huts, and the electronics procurements, as well as a logistic coordinator. Our team has worked with DGS to identify some contractors that we already have contracts with that can perhaps help us with both the hut procurement and the electronics procurement, which will be certainly, I think, help streamline our process for going to contract for those, or for being able to acquire those materials for the project without actually having to go out and go for a bidding process. And then, so really what we hope to focus on starting in July is the logistics coordinator. This position would be to really connect all of the materials that we're getting for the project with the actual construction contractors, so that we can get the materials in the right place at the right time to make sure that we meet the federal deadlines. And with that, that's the end of my report out.
Thank you. I'd like to go ahead and ask if any of the committee members have questions for Mr. Monroe.
I'm sorry. I skipped a slide. My apologies.
Oh, sure. Okay.
One other point, I think, just to kind of level set in terms of how we're approaching the, CDT is approaching the project. Since SB 156 was signed in July of 2021, the Department of Technology is really, just moved as quickly as possible and really on all fronts to try to develop and plan this project. And so now that we have the map out there, I think it's important to understand we're kind of moving more from this planning and stand-up phase into a governance phase. And so as we've provided Caltrans with the map, they're moving forward with really that implementation in terms of construction, in terms of doing the pre-construction work. Similarly, Golden State Net is our third-party administrator is moving forward with both understanding the alternatives for leasing through IRUs, as well as the development of the schedule services, and really pulling together not just where the infrastructure is, but how it all ties together to provide a service. And then as we'll continue to work with the Public Utilities Commission in terms of coordinating with coordinating with regards to last mile, and making sure that they get the information they need in terms of funding last mile projects that really tie into our middle mile. And the Public Utilities Commission will be providing an update on that shortly. So now I'm done.
Mr. Moreau, thank you for the additional information. We do have a few questions. First question goes Secretary Tong.
Good morning. This is a question for Mr. Monroe. I just wanted to make sure I clearly understand the transition of phase. As you mentioned, that up until this point is really the creation of this middle mile network map, if you would, by working, leveraging what CPUC has provided as the baseline, and then the third-party administrator, Golden State Net, has provided their recommendation. And earlier, the map that you have shown, Ms. Monroe, it's an overlap of the two, so that there is a more of an inclusive map, if you would, to conduct further market research on the ability to fulfill that coverage, either through the combination of construction, leasing where there's line, or looking at opportunities to kind of I hate to use the word co-build, but leverage whatever is available out there as the primary. And because of that, the last slide you had is really Caltrans is taking the lead on the construction and leverage as much of their DIG 1's project as possible to kind of expedite. And then Golden State Net is focusing on leasing opportunity to see how many of those could be fulfilled that way. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That's an excellent summary of all that CDT has been doing with its business partners since SB 156 was signed, and really trying to make sure that we design and move forward with a network that really meets the needs of all Californians.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Second question, Assemblymember Wood.
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Monroe, thanks for your comments. They're much appreciated. Just curious on a couple of notes. What kind of outreach is being done to coordinate with cities and counties? We know local governments are going to have the opportunity to deploy infrastructure like we see in the city I live in, the little city of Healdsburg, where we have municipal power. So is there anything being done at this point to support those who hope that we'll be able to do last mile projects in their communities?
Yes, in addition to the various public roundtables that we've held in terms of giving really an audience and being able to try to provide really targeted information for them, we have the Public Utilities Commission has been working on their last mile, working with the potential grant recipients for their last mile programs. And we work with them in terms of making sure that they understand where the map is going and what the opportunities are for interacting with them. And then we're in this stage we're in now. Golden State Net is also helping us in terms of having some of that outreach, and we want to make sure, and we've developed the system in a way where everybody should be able to access it. And this includes putting, the vaults every 2,500 feet, right? So really there should not be a concern in terms of when people look at the 10,000 mile map as we move forward with it. We're designing the network to maximize that sort of access.
So at this point, it's probably premature to make but I am curious, do we have any sense maybe of how many miles are going to be built versus how many miles might be leased?
We don't. I think one of the big open questions right now is, now that we have this 10,000-mile map out there, and I'm going to speak a little more to this when we get to the project updates, but we have the $1.1 billion budget ask that was in the May revision. That's going to be a big answer, or a big part of the answer to that question.
And then finally, would your efforts be a little easier if you had the granular data that we've been asking for from the large carriers?
Yes, I mean, we're partnering with the Public Utilities Commission to make sure that we build to the right areas. We definitely need to have that data to make sure that we're targeting all of the right areas. So yeah, certainly having that data would really help inform us as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Tong, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry for circling back. I do want to dovetail to what the question raised by Assemblymember Wood in terms of local engagement. Mr. Monroe, I know I have helped kicked off several speaking tours that are in partnership with CPUC, Caltrend, and the Golden State Net, to make sure that information that is being shared here are also being offered at additional, through these speaking tours and listening tours, frankly, to the locals. I wonder if there's a way to, I believe those are all recorded. I wonder if there's a way to make sure those are made available to folks that could not join at the earlier session, and then whether there are scheduled can be posted for upcoming session. Because the end goal here is really to make sure that the local has a voice, as well as not only seeing what's going on, but has a chance to raise their questions and being answered in terms of the state continue to refine this statewide map.
Yes, we definitely can find that out and make available on the Broadband for All website and the Middle Mile Broadband website that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee members, for the valuable questions. Any other questions before we go to the next agenda item? I see none. So the next agenda item is also Mr. Mark Moreau for the Department of Technology update.
All right, thank you. So if we move on to the first slide here, as noted, we have we put in a $1.1 billion request in the May revision. And really what we're trying to show in this slide here is kind of what drives that. Obviously, the mapping is a major component of that, as we've looked at, as Secretary Tong noted, as we have looked at both the map that was provided by the Public Utilities Commission, as well as that provided by the Golden State Net, and have recommended at this 10,000-mile network that is intended to reach out to reach out to those unserved and underserved communities identified by the Public Utilities Commission. So that really is a big cost driver. It's not the only one. I think, as I think we've noted in the past, if we just look at inflation, just outside of what is currently happening with the economy, I think standard inflation was expected to increase costs for the project over the life of it between now and 2026 by over $400 million. And then when we look at the other potential labor shortages or material shortages that would be caused by increased demand across the country, we also expect costs to increase from that, as well as for some other components of the project, such as repeater huts and regional exchange locations that tie us back into the broader World Wide Web. So there are several different drivers of this, and we just kind of wanted to repeat that and kind of show how the mapping is a big part of it, but that's not even all of it. So we can go to the next slide. One of the things I wanted to try to cover really quickly here, and we post these slides after each meeting on our website, and so this is perhaps a valuable reference. But I noticed that we tend to use a lot of terms, and I try to make sure everybody understands those terms. So just real quickly, when we talk about fiber, we're talking about the glass cable that the signals run through. I think most people are familiar with that. Conduit is the reinforced plastic tubing that we put down. And so, obviously we need, that's what protects the fiber. That's an important component of that. We have used in our modeling, we've assumed 2 inches because that will handle any size of the fiber counts that noted above there. We're assuming a standard 288 is fairly future-proof and being able to meet the needs of the various numbers of communities. Yeah, so that's a conduit. When we get to vaults, I think I've mentioned those previously. Those are also called pull boxes. We put them about every 2,500 feet. And so that's necessary just for pulling the system through. But all of these end up serving as potential points for provider or for last mile providers to link into our network. And another component that I think we probably haven't talked about quite enough are the electronics and the repeater huts. So repeater huts are really just small buildings that house the electronics. But when you think about the signals that go through wires, just like anywhere else, a signal's only good for a certain distance. I think we, generally speaking, we assume these fiber signals go for about 50 miles. And so every 50 miles, we would have repeater huts with electronics that would repeat the signal, and so they're just what they sound like, but really important for making sure that have a reliable signal going. So as we move forward with the project, these are kind of the big components. And then the last one that I'll mention is the regional internet exchange points, or IXPs, and these are the points where our network will tie into rest of the World Wide Web, and so you can. In theory, you could have one. We're probably going to have a number more than that. The idea is to have multiple access points for the network to be able to tie in and provide that reliability of service. So from time to time, I'll try to make sure we define terms so that people are we all kind of become familiar and have an operating lexicon here. But just wanted to cover some basic definitions of what we're talking about. Next slide. I've mentioned in the past, and I think it's been mentioned already, that we are working internally with Golden State Net and some of our other partners to pull together a market sounding. When we look at the when we look at the kind of services we want to offer, this needs to be able to be operated by our third-party administrator, and so we want to make sure we have a good understanding from both existing last mile providers and as well as potentially new last mile providers, or even the communities that are still looking to establish last mile service. We want to through a combination of electronic surveys and interviews, really understand what their needs are in terms of the throughput, in terms of the whether or not they would have the need or capacity to be able to do dark fiber leases, if that's going to meet their needs, or if they really require a lit service. And so we're hoping, as we move forward with this, and we'll report more in July, they're really in the process of working on this right now. But to be able to come back, and it's going to really inform kind of what kind of service agreements we need to have, how what the revenues will be, kind of what the costs will be. And so it's really going to be helpful in identifying the business model for how this moves forward. Next slide. And I think with that, that's the end of my presentation, and we could see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I will open up to committee members. Is there any questions for Mr. Monroe? You did an excellent job answering all the questions. All right, we're going to go ahead and go to the next agenda item, which is the Golden State Net, the third-party administrator, and it's Tony Naughton. Mr. Naughton. Jules, is Mr. Naughton online?
I do not see him. I see Mr. Hunzinger.
Okay, we'll give Mr. Hunzinger an opportunity. Mr. Hunzinger, did you want to give an update? Oh, there he is.
There, yeah, sorry, I was muted on your end. My apologies.
Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you.
Mr. Naughton, if you're speaking, you are on mute.
Sorry, I seem to have been muted again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. So if we can move to the slide, we continue to work in a transitional state or a transitional phase as the third-party administrator, transitioning, as I said in the last meeting, from the design phase to the real development execution of this network. The key areas of activity right now, we're continuing to focus a great deal on the development processes for the retransmission huts, or ILA huts, as we oftentimes refer to them as. Approximately every 50 miles in the network, there will be such a reamplification or retransmission hut, which means there will be over 180 of these huts across the network. And the implementation and integration of huts, it's really a key area. I really feel that the approach is a risk management approach in the development of a network like this. And Golden State Net will be very focused on consistency and quality assurance of these huts, working with an engineering integration partner to make sure that hut development and testing into production stage is extremely well executed. In addition to that, substantive discussions on joint build opportunities have really significantly increased over the last several weeks, both in terms of the number of telecom carriers that have expressed interest in joint building with the state in this middle mile network. And conversely, the potential number of miles in the network that could be constructed under these joint projects. The overall goals, once again, of joint construction, joint building, are cost savings and furtherance of the dig once, dig smart approach to developing a network of this kind. In addition, discussions and activity with carriers and other service providers has also increased pretty significantly over the last several weeks, and we're currently evaluating some of the specific dark fiber proposals that have been made to us by these carriers. Dark fiber could comprise a significant portion of the middle mile network, where feasibility of new construction is lacking, or in some cases it may be extremely expensive, as opposed to the cost of leveraging existing facilities that are already in place. As we've stated before, and as Mark Monroe alluded to a few minutes ago, determinations of build versus buy will come out of the optimization process that we're engaged in right now with CDT. Further, there's been quite a bit of continued work on the system layer design and program plan. Both documents are key to the execution of this program, where generally speaking, just to refresh you on those, the system layer design is a living document. It is a publication which contains the designs and operating policies for the network, as opposed to the program plan, which is essentially a playbook of the processes and execution steps in the development of that network. Both of these documents are approaching what we would call version 1.0, probably by the end of this month. Work continues also, I should mention, on the business plan for this network, as also Mark alluded to a few minutes ago, where the business plan in this context is a projection of operating costs and revenues in order to project the network's ability to be self-sustaining for operation and maintenance purposes in the years ahead. We're now focusing quite a bit more on the scale and placement of regional exchange points. Again, as Mark was mentioning, these regional exchange points will be primary access points for access and collection of last mile traffic and other users of this network under the open access policies of the network. And of course, in addition to those facilities being used for access, there will be a generous allotment of access vaults distributed approximately every 2,500 feet in the network. The regional exchange points play a key role, in addition to access, as it relates to the potential placement of servers for other services to be provided through this network. Many of those could be potentially third-party servers co-located into regional exchange points, where the idea in this architectural approach is to get servers, whether they're providing content or other types of services to customers, commercial or residential, through this network, get those servers as close to the edge of the middle mile network as possible. And that could be facilitated by regional exchange points, some of which are probably going to be co-located into existing carrier facilities. So that really wraps up the description of our core activities over the last month or so since the time of the last Middle Mile Advisory Committee. And I should ask if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Naughton. First, for the committee members, is there any questions for Mr. Naughton? All right, I see none. We'll go ahead and go to the next agenda item. Thank you, Mr. Naughton, for your update.
And my apologies, I just recognized that my video camera was not turned on. I'm sorry for that.
No worries. The Department of Technology should be able to help you on that one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Our next update is from Jonathan Lacrets of the Public Utilities Commission. Mr. Lacrets.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm Jonathan Lacrets, and I'm a manager in the CPUC's Communication Division. I'll be providing a snapshot of recent activities that the CPUC has taken to support the Last Mile Broadband Initiative. Next slide, please. This slide provides a snapshot of the CPUC's activities to implement the Last Mile Broadband Initiative programs. As a quick reminder, the CPUC is engaged in 4 key activities to support the deployment of last mile broadband. Technical assistance grants will assist local governments and tribes to prepare for broadband infrastructure. We anticipate accepting applications in either June or July. The Loan Loss Reserve Fund will enable entities and nonprofits to secure financing for broadband infrastructure. We anticipate issuing a staff proposal for public comment in August. The federal funding account will award grants to fund last mile broadband infrastructure projects in every county. We are currently developing priority areas and will be publicly releasing those areas prior to accepting applications. The suite of California Advanced Services Fund programs provide financial assistance with broadband infrastructure deployment in unserved areas, as well as financial assistance to adoption activities with general grant award opportunities, as well as specific programs to meet the needs of public housing developments. In addition to a number of grant opportunities that I will cover in my next slide, I want to note that the CPUC is taking comment on infrastructure funding rules and recently extended the comment period to June 27th for opening comments and July 5th for reply comments. Next slide, please. This slide provides a summary of open grant opportunities to fund activities that support the Last Mile Broadband Initiative. Broadband adoption grants fund projects by public entities and community-based organizations to promote digital literacy and broadband access. Applications are accepted on a rolling basis, and the next group will be considered for awards are due by July 1st. Grants to consortia help regional organizations to develop broadband projects and complete the grant application process. Consortia need to apply by July 15th. The third opportunity is for grants to build broadband networks offering free broadband services for residents of low-income communities. This would include residents of publicly supported housing, as well as farm worker housing. In addition to these grants, we anticipate a staff proposal regarding expanding eligibility to mobile home parks and other communities with low-income residents to be issued over the coming months. Applications related to free broadband service for low-income residents are accepted on a rolling basis, and the next group that will be considered for awards are due by July 1st. More information on these grant opportunities are available on the public web pages, links for which are on these slides. Additionally, we can provide contacts for each of the grant programs to those who email statewidebroadband@cpuc.ca.gov. And this concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lacrets. Opening up to committee members, if you have any questions regarding the CPUC update. I see none, so thank you very much for your update. It was very informative. Our last agenda item before public comment is from Caltrans, Hardeep Takar. We'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Hardeep Takar. I work with Caltrans, serving as the Broadband Middle Mile Network Program Director, and will be providing the progress update today. Caltrans continues to collaborate with the Department of Technology to develop projects to build the middle mile network on the state highway system right away based on the system-wide mapping provided by CDT. I'd like to start off with an overview of the project development strategy to build a 10,000-mile network by December 2026. The system-wide map currently includes initial 18 project locations that cover approximately 844 miles of the state highway system that were approved to begin pre-construction work in November 2021, and the remaining non-initial 18 locations statewide that approximately cover 9,078 miles. In order to accelerate building the middle mile network, we are evaluating existing transportation projects that can build the broadband elements for the middle mile network, also referred to as Dig Smart or Dig Once opportunities. These include highway projects that are currently in construction and highway projects that will be in construction or to be constructed within the next 3 years. And this effort is primarily focused to try to lower the costs for building the network. Where existing highway project opportunities are not viable within the network mapping provided by the Department of Technology, Caltrans will develop standalone projects dedicated to build the network. Our goal is to complete preliminary engineering and environmental studies for both the initial 18 locations and the non-initial 18 locations by July 2023. Complete preparation of the construction contracts by June 2024, and construction award by no later than December 2024 in order to comply with the federal funding timelines requirements to encumber funds. For project locations that need more lead time due to challenges with environmental clearance, permitting, and working around existing utilities, we will consider opportunities to streamline delivery to get us to the December 2024 construction award by allowing sufficient lead time to engage with the resource agencies to develop permitting approvals, and also consider alternative delivery methods in addition to the traditional delivery methods that Caltrans uses. Our target will be to begin construction no later than January 2025 and complete construction by September 2026 to allow time for project closeout no later than December 2026 in order to comply with the funding timeline requirements to liquidate the funds. Next slide, please. Caltrans started by looking at all transportation projects and taking advantage to use every Dig Smart opportunity that we can. We are using criteria to ensure projects are viable and can advance implementing the middle mile network. This slide shows the number of potentially viable highway projects that can add broadband elements by trenching to include conduit, fiber, optic cable, junction boxes, and supporting elements within the state highway system right away. These are potentially viable projects and not yet confirmed to move forward with adding broadband. The criteria we use to identify these viable projects include our ability to comply with the funding timelines that require fund allocation by December 2024 and expending the allocation by December 2026. We also look at screening criteria for ability to add on broadband elements within the existing approved environmental document or relative ease of revalidating this document. We also look at our ability to add broadband elements without the need to have additional permanent right-of-way acquisition. Projects are typically excluded based on their inability to accommodate the broadband elements and that can potentially result in delays and cost increases to the transportation project. Next slide, please. This slide covers an overview of the DigSmart opportunities that we have identified to date. We are looking at approximately part of the initial 18 locations. We're looking at 9 viable projects to build roughly about 95 miles of the network. As part of the non-initial 18 locations, we're looking at 10 projects to build roughly about 77 miles for a total of 19 projects that will build about 172 miles of the middle mile network. And these projects, the initial 18 projects, is broken down also by start dates for construction. Some of them will start in 2022, and then others are going to be starting anywhere between 2023 all the way through December 2024 in some cases. Next slide, please. Regarding the 18 initial locations, work related to preliminary engineering and environmental studies is underway. Multiple projects will be developed within the 18 locations. To date, we've identified 9 Dig-Once opportunities that plan to build approximately 96 miles of the middle mile network, and 28 standalone projects that will approximately build about 748 miles of the network, adding up to a total of 37 projects to build 844 miles of the network. Next slide, please. So pre-construction work includes completing environmental studies to obtain permits and approvals from resource agencies and design work to prepare the construction contract packages. Environmental work for the initial 18 locations on the list of projects shown on the slide ranges anywhere from 5% to 60% complete, and design work for the initial 18 locations is in the range of 0 to 50% complete. Again, our target date for completing preparation of the construction contracts is June 2024, actually no later than June 2024, and we expect the construction will begin on these projects as early as July 2022 for the DigSmart opportunities to no later than December 2024 for the remaining standalone projects. Next slide, please. At the remaining non-initial 18 locations that add up to approximately 9,078 miles of the network, we are currently identifying project opportunities to be in June 2022, which is underway, to include both DigSmart and standalone projects. Pre-construction is underway in opportunities that have been identified, 10 DigSmart opportunities that plan to build approximately 76 miles of the middle mile network, and 3 standalone projects that will build approximately 152 miles, adding up to 13 projects to build approximately 228 miles of the network. The target date for completing preparation of the construction contracts on these projects will be no later than June 2024. We expect construction will begin as early as June 2023 for the DigSmart opportunities to no later than December 2024 for the standalone projects. Caltrans continues to be committed to this broadband initiative and will continue to collaborate with Department of Technology to identify challenges and find opportunities to accelerate delivery to connect communities across the state. This concludes the Caltrans update. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Takar. Very informative. I'd like to open it up to any committee members that would like to ask questions. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Takar. So it was informative. I had a hard time following pieces, especially of the timeline. So,
Sure.
And I just would like a little bit more background in how and when. So maybe just the first slide, I think, and then your last slide were the most helpful, just in terms of what we can expect when. So could you maybe just go through that a little bit slower?
Sure. Can we go back to the slide number 2, please? Oh, sorry, yeah, that one right there. Okay, so as you can see here, our plan is to begin pre-construction work on the entire 10,000 mile.
Can you be a little bit more specific about what pre-construction work is?
Sure, yeah. The pre-construction work essentially involves completing environmental studies to make sure that the alignments that we're proposing to build on are environmentally cleared. We are using the least environmentally damaging alternatives moving forward. And we also have to complete environmental studies, preliminary design, prepare the construction contract packages that we can put out for advertisement and bids, and execute the construction contract. So all of that is considered pre-construction. So it's environmental and putting the construction package together.
Okay. And then, so that's the first phase that you're beginning completion of right now.
Right,
You've started and continuing, right?
We've started that process now.
Great.
That is the pre-construction phase.
Okay.
And we plan to complete pre-construction phase no later than June 2024 for the entire. That is the plan. Delivery plan is to complete for the entire 10,000 mile network by no later than June 2024 to allow us sufficient time to execute the construction contracts by December 2024. For the entire 10,000 mile network.
Okay, and then in terms of, so I'm happy to see that you'll meet the requirements of the federal law. How, as you're doing pre-construction, obviously we have procurement out for some of the conduit fiber. What about making sure that we have the contracts for the actual construction work? What is the plan that you'll execute in order to ensure that we have folks to do the building?
Our plan to as I had mentioned, we are looking for every opportunity to accelerate. You know, the June 2024 timeline is a no later than timeline. So where we are able to accelerate the simple repetitive work for the lesser complex locations, we will be putting those contracts out sooner than June 2024 to balance our workload and essentially meet the timeline requirements for construction. So again, you know, where the complex locations are, we will be looking at working with the resource agencies to find ways to develop programmatic permits and also use alternative delivery methods, which is not the typical design, bid, build process that Caltrans uses. These are essentially delivery methods that could involve job order contracting or construction manager general contracting, other procedures that can help us accelerate to get us to executing the construction contracts. Again, the goal is to execute those contracts no later than December 2024. So
that can't, well, it's not a goal.
Yes.
That is what will happen,
yes,
correct?
That will,
okay.
Yes.
And then I assume, and this is to Mr. Monroe, just in terms of how we, I just want to be clear that it will be contracted within 6 months and that meets the federal requirements of an encumbrance. So that's question number one. And then two, if you could just be a little bit more specific in terms of the indefeasible rights of use, the co-location, sort of how that will all be built into then the construction work that Caltrans will do. And then, so that's my two questions to you, Mr. Monroe. And then to Mr. Takar, just to be clear, the actual work that will be done in terms of the building, and then later the operations and maintenance, which is more a Mr. Monroe question, but that is all work that you contract for, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so you're beginning that process now in terms of making sure that you have sort of eligible contractors and can execute those no later than the 2024 date. Okay, thank you.
Yes, certainly. So I think I'll probably start with the second question first in terms of when we talk about what Mr. Takar's talked us through here in terms of the pre-construction process. Caltrans, I think their broad rule has been it normally takes them for these sorts of projects approximately 2 years to go through when they go out, they have to go out and do surveys and really draw up every inch of what we're building and where we're building it. And so that's a big component of drawing up the blueprints for it. And so an added component to that pre-construction is trying to identify and get updated construction costs. And so we now that Caltrans is able to start pre-construction on the 10,000 miles, the intent is that within the next year, as soon as possible by segment, however quickly as Caltrans is able to do it, to get updated cost estimates. And so, broadly speaking, and I want to go faster in every one of these steps, but I'm just going to say broadly speaking, if we get updated cost estimates for the various segments, obviously building in different places throughout the state, different environments, it's going to, there's going to be some cost variance there, but we get cost estimates. That's going to tell us how much we can afford to build. And by then we will know what was in the budget in terms of any additional funding. That's going to give us our total amount of funding for this project.
Right.
And then we take that, we take that funding and we have to look at that updated cost estimate, and we're able to decide then how much can we afford to build, and then how much are we going to, and I use the term build here. I know Tony Naughton from Golden State Net had also mentioned joint build. So, these are opportunities that we're also looking at for, other providers or anybody else who's going to be burying cable in the ground. When you bury cable in the ground, the burying it in the ground is the most expensive part. And so we want to be able to share those costs whenever possible to make our dollars go further. So, I mean, that's a component there that I don't mention every time, but it's always there. But basically, as we have an updated cost estimate and we know how much funding we have available, we're going to we'll have to make the decision about how much we can afford to build.
Right. I think I'm going to just cut you off a little bit, Mr. Monroe, because it's not exactly my question. I think that's helpful. It's more the interconnectedness of the network itself and sort of the resiliency as well. So it's not, I say every time, it's not just a question of what we're building. It's a question of how we're building the entire network. So I think that's really helpful, and certainly understand the cost components, but just want to be clear from what I understand from what everyone is saying, there's such a joint effort in terms of how we're creating the entire network. So the work that Caltrans is doing is happening in parallel with the work that Golden State Net and our consultants are doing to make sure that we have this entire network that will include some leasing, some joint builds, some co-location, all of this ring topography, which makes us more resilient. So I think our challenge is, just because we're building a whole network and not necessarily just a single construction project, is to talk in those terms, because there will be so much coordination and collaboration. So I think does that make sense to you, just in terms of a way to look at it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, because I think that's what I'm trying to communicate,
okay,
but maybe not successfully. You're right in terms of this is a complete network. When we talk about the 10,000 miles, that includes the ring topology, right. that includes that. But Golden State Net, they're really are experts in this area to help us take a bunch of segments and actually make them an operational network.
Great.
Right. And so you're correct. That is the work that they are doing right now. The sooner we get updated information from Caltrans, the sooner we'll be able to, that's really going to feed those decisions and help us better understand and decide quicker what we can do.
Right. Thank you. I know there's a couple other questions, but if we wanted Mr. Naughton to answer any of that.
Mr. Naughton.
Thank you. I had to unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, as Mark has indicated, the coordination is really, it's a dual process going on right now, where we're asking Caltrans to evaluate and provide cost projections, while at the same time exploring, or in some cases evaluating, proposals for dark fiber that have already been made to us by some of the carriers involved. And so coordinating those two activities, you also asked about regional exchange points. I mentioned in my presentation a process by which we will make recommendations for where regional exchange points should be located. Key factors in that process involve adjacency to Caltrans right of way wherever possible, and it will not be possible in every case, as well as adjacency to last mile providers that will be able to use this network for access to the core as they are providing broadband services to their customers. So it's parallel activities with coordination along the way, and resulting in, yes, contractual commitments, whether it's construction, joint construction, or dark fiber leasing, contractual commitments to be made no later than the end of 2024, of course, under the ARPA restrictions, and expended by the end of 2026. In the case of dark fiber arrangements, it's quite possible that those could be completed with activation of certain segments of the network well before those funding deadlines.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Ms. Miller, I feel
Yeah.
like I didn't quite get to your other question relative to the to Caltrans work. So assuming that 2-year time frame, and again, we're going to make efforts with Caltrans looking for ways to speed up permitting, to speed up that time frame. But assuming that 2 years, yes, as noted, that goes to that takes us to July, basically July of 2024. So I think as Caltrans has historically looked at its RFP process, if we were to then identify and try to move forward with construction, we'd be looking at moving forward with some number of contracts that, depending on how large, I think, we're hoping for larger projects, but depending on how large the projects are, we're looking for some number, potentially in the hundreds of contracts that would need to be developed. And so if Caltrans were to go out and try to sign contracts for 10,000 miles, right, that would be, let's say that's 100 contracts. Those would need to be developed. Those RFPs would go out in July. That would be, 3 months. So August, September. So by October, they would be able to start making decisions to the extent they broke out the 10,000 over some period of time. But you kind of get the picture there, is that all the funds have to be under contract by December, and there's that 3-month process. And so we're looking at any way we can to speed that up so that Caltrans has more time to spread out that work, to spread out the amount of time that it takes them to do the contracting, and to speed up when they can actually start that.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And to Mr. Takar, obviously we know about the various districts and Caltrans, but just making sure that, that the district collaboration remains strong and that ultimately it's the state that's accountable for it.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Miller.
you.
And thank you, presenters. I do see others that have questions for Mr. Takar. Secretary Tong.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. 3 points I wanted to make, 2 or more of a question, and I'll start with the statement. I think just hearing the last conversation, perhaps a suggestion to our team here that, we use the word like, developing or creating a statewide network as a differentiator to build versus lease, because the construction and the lease, it's how to provide this coverage of the 10,000, but the ultimate goal here is using combination of all of above as methods to provide the statewide network that has a coverage to all of the area that needed to have coverage. So just something to think about in terms of terminology. And then with that, specific to Mr. Takar, that timeline you show was helpful. I'm curious to see if perhaps at the next version of that timeline, to have another dimension of information being laid out. For example, right now that timeline is listing in a very linear way of showing the project between those who are initial 18 versus non-initial 18. And then the timeline is in more of, the majority of these, construction work or contract will be done by certain time. I think as you have presented in the subsequent slide, that there are also opportunities Caltrans are already in the middle of it, of leveraging those DIC-1 opportunities. So those DIC-1's opportunities where construction is already done, some are actually, have contract for construction. I think it would be good to show that level of activity in the same timeline. It's a single view, so that it shows that for the ones you can leverage DIC-1s, what's the timeline for getting those connectivity, built. For the ones you do not have a leverageability of DIC-1s, what is the typical step to go through and yes, I've heard loud and clear from Mr. Monroe, that typical step, you guys going to try to streamline even further to bring up the dates. I just want to make sure, is that correct? Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, Secretary Tong. Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then lastly, the last point I want to make is also when it comes to either permitting or procuring construction contracts, to the extent possible, to looking at these as a opportunity for streamline and process improvement. I would highly recommend Caltrans to leverage the resources that the administration can provide to do so. You know, I mean, building this middle mile network, it's already unprecedented enough. You know, it's really an opportunity to see what we can do as a collective team to be very thinking outside the box to streamline to bulk purchase or bulk permitting review. I don't know what that is, but that's what I would encourage Caltrans to do.
Thank you, Secretary Tong. We are working with the resource agencies to streamline through programmatic permitting processes. So yes, we can report more on that at the next meeting. So thank you.
As well as contracting for these constructions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. I also see Assembly Member Wood.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Takar, could we put this, or somebody put the slide back up with the timeline? I'd appreciate that. My question's related to that.
Sure. This slide, the second slide. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So I'm looking at the timeline, and we say initial 18 locations begin pre-construction work. And part of what I heard you say was we're still looking at CEQA and as related to this. And my thought, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that one of the reasons these projects were selected is that, or these initial locations were selected is that we were pretty well along in the planning process here. Now, if you're building a highway, I can't imagine a bigger impact to the environment than that from in your department. So I'm a little puzzled why putting conduit in or something would somehow trigger additional CEQA work here, because it seems like we're already disturbing the environment in a really dramatic way. Is this overkill, or is this? I mean, what am I missing here? Because I don't feel like we should be having to do more of that. And I thought these projects were further along. So help me understand that.
Yes. So yes, we've started the environmental studies process. There are locations along the initial 18 locations that were provided to us that we still need to go through the environmental process, both through CEQA and the NEPA process, to identify areas that are either impacting the natural environment. So we still have to complete those studies. So we are completing those initial environmental surveys to identify, what are the resources and that we may be impacting. We do have the CEQA exemption process, the categorical exemption and the categorical exclusions that have been provided for the broadband work, but still we still have to comply with the environmental laws that require us to address avoidance and minimization of impacts to the natural environment. So those studies still have to be accompanied with the CEQA clearance. So that is the work that's underway, and that's what's taking time for us to get through that process.
I guess I'm just puzzled because my impression was that these were projects that were well into the planning process, and I have a hard time imagining that this additional work in an area that's going to be grossly disrupted is somehow requires additional CEQA documentation. Look, I am fully in favor of CEQA, but my goodness. How much overkill do we have to do here? Because I really thought these 18 projects were further along, and now we're hearing we have to do additional CEQA studies on top of what you're already doing to move this forward. So that implies to me that maybe these projects weren't as far along as we were told they were. Help me understand that.
Assemblymember Wood, we have a committee member, Janice Benton, that'd like to respond to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And great questions and great points, Assemblymember Wood. Just one clarification. I'm not sure that we're understanding. So the initial 18 weren't selected because they were further along. They were selected because they were opportunities to learn, and then also selected apart. And I'll defer to Mark Monroe on the selection of those locations. But it wasn't because that we had projects already in the works. Some of those initial 18 do align with the Dig Smart, Dig Wants opportunities, but not all of them. So some of them were initiating new standalone projects.
Well, that's fundamentally different understanding than what I had. My understanding was that these were projects that were well into the planning process. So that is not what I understood from the beginning. So
yeah, I would be happy to jump in here a little bit. Somebody remember what I think this conversation has came up before, and I believe the team has, made multiple explanations that the initial 18, it's really a sample of multiple projects at various readiness stage. Some are dig ones that, and I don't know the number, so don't quote me on that. Some of the 18s are dig ones, which why I believe in the subsequent Caltrans slide have mentioned those dig ones that happen to be 18, initial 18, the construction are like underway or close to begin. Some of the 18s are brand new standalone, and therefore Caltrans can use those to study the right of way, what are all those, intricacies needs to be involved. Some are specifically for Golden State Net to take a look if any of those 18 could be an early lease opportunity, as well as some maybe a joint bill that you might be partnering with somebody and just go at it. I think that was really the intent of the initial 18. If there was any perhaps, understanding those were more ready than before, is that each of the 18 has a good purpose for them, that they do not mean all of the 18 are ready to be, constructioned. I want to make sure that's clarified.
And I appreciate that, Secretary Tong. I just thought they were further along, quite frankly. And so is it possible in a future meeting that we can actually get an idea of where each of these 18 projects is, so we understand how many of them are still in the CEQA process and so on, so that we have a really good understanding of where these 18 projects are? I think that would clear up a lot of confusion. Certainly would for me, because my impression was these projects were chosen because we were further along in the planning process, and it sounds like I'm mistaken, but I don't think I'm alone.
And if I could add to that, so certainly, yes, we can do that. I think some of the slides actually have tried to show that, but we have a challenge in terms of how big they get in terms of what we're able to show here. So maybe we can kind of work on something for next time to be able to zoom in a little better. What I will say, as Secretary Tong noted, the overall we chose the 18 because we knew that that's where we needed solutions, and we went through the criteria that the Secretary talked about. In looking at any of the 18, a number of them, and I'm looking at some of the slides here, I think I'm going to use the number 9. 9 of them at least had locations. So you're looking at maybe an 80-mile project, and there's a 5-mile segment of that where a transportation project was planned, where that CEQA work is done, right? So now you're talking about 5 miles of an 80-mile project. So I think there's a fair amount of overlap, and I'll just tell you, personally, it's a challenge in terms of trying to lay out and explain these, because of that crossover, right? We want to focus on the dig once. Some of them are 18, some of them are not part of the 18. But I think that maybe where part of the confusion is that as we look at the 18, there are a number that have projects, Caltrans projects that were planned and that are planned to be started over the next couple of years. And I think, looking at one of the tables here, I'm identifying at least 9 of those. 3 we think will start this year, 6 will start in the subsequent years. So maybe that I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Can you put up slide 9?
Slide 20, I think, is the in the broader deck. If everybody has a chance to, there we go. That is 18, so 2 more. There we go. And so you can see here, that's really, and I apologize. The map here is intended to show largely what you're asking for, Assembly Member was. But and so we kind of work on how to better illustrate that. But really what we're talking about here is we look at on the left, you see the initial 18 and of those, which are the dig smart opportunities. And that's really what we're talking about. So 9, again, 18, 9 of those have locations where you're right. Some SQL work has been done. And so there's still, as I understand from Caltrans process, some sort of incremental increase in SQL workload. I don't think it's substantial. It's certainly not like the rest of those projects would be, but that's where some of the confusion might come in.
Okay. Is there a way to, at some point, get a breakdown of why each of these 18 was selected?
Yes, I mean, certainly we can, if we want to kind of go into each of those 18, I think we've had, as Secretary Tong noted, we really were looking, first of all, per SB 156, where had PUC done enough analysis to be able to say we were meeting those requirements in terms of identifying where solutions were needed, right? And so when we looked at the statewide map and all the work that was going on, these 18 locations were identified. They as wherever else we're still making decisions, getting public feedback on, we knew that we needed solutions here. And I think that's really where I've focused on that. Each of them, as the Secretary noted, they have other components in terms of where Caltrans thought they could build sooner, where there were these dig once or dig smart opportunities that kind of layered in there. So really, it doesn't get much more impressive than that. I mean, that really was what we were trying to do, was to look at those priorities there and just get started where we could, and so we can start the process of learning.
Okay. Well, that may be where the confusion is, because recognizing that those 18 were identified by the PUC, my impression would have been that and that's maybe where I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong there, that we thought these were potentially further along than they are. And to hear that we're still going to be here's like quite a while to get CEQA documents on some of these areas is kind of discouraging, because we're now into June. We're almost a year since the bill was passed, and so anyway, that's where my concerns come from.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, and I know President Reno has her hand raised. Just specifically, I think the further along, Assemblymember with all due respect, I think this is where perhaps terminology, it's further along on planning, but the planning is not solely construction of new work. I think that's
planning is CEQA as well. I mean, that's part of the planning process.
Well, yeah, but I do think some of them, so I'm not sure, Dr. Wood, where the confusions come from. We've been really consistent that in order to leverage the economies of scale that we need to build the 10,000 miles, it's not unlike building a house. I mean, you wouldn't even have been able to sort of reconstruct a house within this year period of time. So in order to get the economies of scale and the procurement we need to execute the entire project, we chose those 18 projects because we weren't ready on the 10,000, so that Caltrans could start all of the work they have, which included, so I think we are, in fact, I mean, the fact that there's not a shovel in the ground, I hear that, but the work that needs to happen in order to get those shovels in the ground, I do think a fair amount of that has been done. Some of it is much farther along because of the dig once opportunities, which you have moved forward more than anyone else given your legislation. But in terms of the reason for the 18 was where there was relatively little controversy. It could be across the state so that we could begin all of this pre-construction, including some of these initial environmental studies that can then allow us to complete the work within the 3-year time frame. And the important part is you keep referring to CEQA. There are some exemptions, especially within the right-of-ways. So the environmental work, and Mr. Takar, I do think it's going to be important to really, I think there's 2 things we need Caltrans to do. One is to really drill down on the timing on these 18. And 2 is to sort of better explain where the economies of scale are, because I do think that's going to be really important in your timeline to give some certainty to this committee. I think this was a really good first step. I do think more detail is necessary, but those are, I wouldn't call it that work had been done. I think it was creating these economies of scale for the research to then execute the completion of construction. So that's the work that's been done for a year. It's gone much faster than we expected. I absolutely think we need to remain accountable and more precise on the timeline, and more precise kind of on what Caltrans is doing in terms of what you know now and how it will move along. I think, you know, we can take a little bit of a project management approach to this, Mr. Takar, in terms of actually listing out some of what we're doing. I think all of that is really helpful. But I do think I think it's a little bit somewhere in the middle, Dr. Wood, because it's not that nothing has happened. A lot has happened. It's just that I hear the frustration, but I don't think these projects were ever chosen with the intent that this was, we already knew where the shovels were. The projects were chosen with a statewide view so that the next 10,000 miles after these initial 18, all of these kinks would be worked out, and we would know how to get the contracts, how to get the supplies, what the leasing looked like, where the resiliency was. So I do think we need to be a lot clearer on these 18, but it was never the intent that we chose them because construction was already happening. But I think if I could just summarize, I think a more detailed timeline and more kind of what has been accomplished, because I do agree, it does sound like we have similar presentations each time. So I do think that'll be really important to really show the work in terms of how much you've actually accomplished. And I know it's significant. So I do hope that'll help answer some of these questions.
No, and I thank you very much and for that. And I guess the timeline we saw was the same timeline we saw in the last meeting. And so that wasn't really new information for me. And also knowing that we have I thought we built into this some ability with CEQA exemptions. And so if we're still having to seek additional CEQA documents, it'd be nice to know what they are, why our process that we put in place isn't adequate. And so that's where what got my mind going here was the fact that what I heard was we're having to do additional CEQA work. And I thought, well, wait a second. I thought we had dealt with some of that in the legislation. And so that's where my thoughts are coming from and my concerns are coming from. I have a similar question on the CEQA pieces, actually. I do think that's a really helpful. My guess is there's a distinction between environmental and CEQA, but I think just much more granular detail on that, I think, will be helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Assemblymember Wood and Ms. Miller and Secretary. We had quite a conversation there. President Reynolds, you've been very, very patient. I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I raised my hand actually on this last issue, and I was going to raise exactly the point that Assemblymember Wood just raised, recognizing the CEQA exemption that was built into SB 156. I was also confused about the environmental review conversation, and so I think combined with Ms. Miller's really good, framework for follow-up, I think I would also like to understand what environmental review is being done now, and is the statutory CEQA exemption effective in doing what it was intended to do with these projects to expedite them and get them moving quickly. So my issue has been dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any additional questions from Mr. Takar before we go to public comment?
I think I just raised my hand a very short piled on, if I may. I think these are excellent conversation, and I appreciate Assemblymember Wood, asking this, because I think at the end of the day, it is how to communicate the progress in a clear manner and a specific manner, so it doesn't feel like it's a swirl of information or same information being presented. I think it just again suggestion to our presenters here for the next update specifically. Perhaps it's a joint presentation between Caltrans and GSN, because the initial 18 is supposed to test it out, a combination of big ones that are in construction, the standalone, what needs to go through all of these CEQA or not. I actually call it the permitting work. So it's not limited to only the environmental process. And then for the IRU, I know there's further work that was also done in the initial 18 to take a look where there are any of those opportunities we can learn from. I think some presentations specific to that, to spell out what lessons learned from each of the 18s that could inform us to how to move faster on the remaining network, it would be really helpful. That's my recommendation.
Thank you. Assemblymember Wood.
I'm sorry, I seem to be talking a lot today, but before you go to public comment, I did want to say something. I know in the very beginning, I made comments about the data that we are asking for from the incumbent carriers, the large carriers that they haven't provided. And I suspect there will be comments in the public about that, but I want to frame that a little bit before those comments come in and give an explanation for why. For years and years, we have been told by carriers that areas are served. And when we ask for data about that, we can't get it. And so what does that mean? Does an area served mean that there's one person who has service in there? And if so, and there truly is service in that area available, why are others not taking it up? Is it because of cost? Who knows? But in order for us to really understand the level of service in these areas that are supposedly served, we need that granular data. And my feeling has always been that one of the reasons we don't get that data is that some of the carriers it's about competition and they don't want the competition. Now, that's my opinion. I'm not saying that's fact, but that is my opinion. But I do go back to, I find it very, very interesting that the majority of carriers that have been asked to provide this information to the PUC have done so. Yet, the carriers that provide the majority of services to people in California have not. And that is a fundamental challenge for us and a fundamental problem for us if we're going to get the federal dollars, the mapping that we need to be able to do exactly what SB 156 calls for out there. And that's the spirit in which I asked that question. And I think it's time that we get that information. You can actually go on an AT&T website or any of these others and say, is my area served? And they will tell you if they can provide service for you. Now, we can't do that with every address out there. We don't have the capacity to do that. So what we're asking for them to do is simply, okay, show us who is served. And that is information that will be protected. It's not going to be public. And the idea that they won't do that or cannot do that or will not do that for a variety of reasons that we have been hearing for years and years and years is really, really frustrating. And if it imperils this project, if it imperils this and doesn't get coverage to people who need it, it's a huge disservice, and we need to hang that around their necks because it is not appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead, Jules, and move to public comment. So if you just be able to brief everyone on the guidelines and go ahead and start the comment process.
Certainly, Madam Chair, and please let me know if I need to adjust the volume of my speakers so I don't have feedback for everybody. In order to ensure that everyone who wishes to make public comment has the opportunity to do so, we respectfully request 1 speaker per entity and 2 minutes per speaker. We will go in order of in-person public comment, online submissions, Zoom. Madam Chair, would you like to start the in-person public comment?
Thank you, Jules. There is no in-person comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. We do have a public comment from Lisa Lavelle from the city of Avalon. Ms. Lavelle, are you in attendance? I didn't see her name, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and attach her public comment to the meeting recap. Ms. Kinney, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Jackie Kinney from the California Cable and Telecommunications Association. Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all the members. Again, Jackie Kinney with the California Cable and Telecommunications Association, wanting to respond to the comments of Assemblymember Wood and President Reynolds earlier in the meeting. Just to start out by saying, appreciate the comments, we hear you, and to emphasize very strongly that CCTA and the cable company ISP members are absolutely committed to ensuring the success of California's $6 billion broadband investment, and to emphasize that the cable ISPs have been working to provide the PUC data for the broadband availability map to identify the unserved areas that lack 25/3 service as specified in statute, and to provide this data consistent with both state and federal law related to the broadband mapping and also in compliance with all of the consumer privacy laws, and in particular, federal laws specific to cable companies that prohibit disclosure of personally identifying information. The data request this year is different than it has been in the past in terms of the level of personal identifying information that the PUC is seeking. So I want to emphasize that the cable ISPs have responded. They have not ignored the data request. They have responded, and they will submit further responses today. I want to emphasize very strongly the cable ISPs are seeking collaborative engagement with the PUC to further understand the concerns and to ensure a proper process so that we can be in compliance with federal privacy laws and state privacy laws, and also to ensure that California can expeditiously develop the broadband map to identify those 25 free unserved areas while also protecting consumer privacy. Again, we emphasize our shared commitment to achieving the goal of the success of the governor's Broadband for All initiative. And we appreciate further engagement to make progress on this issue with all of the policymakers, the PUC, legislators, and this committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I just recommend that Ms. Kinney submit her comments in writing too? You were coming in and out, Ms. Kinney. I don't know if there was no service where you were, but just if you could submit those comments potentially in writing as well, just so they can be reviewed for the record.
Yes.
Building upon what was just said, if you lower your computer volumes, your speaker volume down to about 10 or so, it will get rid of the feedback. I had the same thing earlier. Mr. Stantos, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Is my speaker off mute?
We could hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I'm very sorry that I'm traveling and I was unavoidable appointment up in the mountains. But yeah, just one thing I would like to thank Representative Wood for being an advocate for the people. Although I think he's being, his professional courtesy is admirable. But I'll say what maybe he can't say, which is that the ISPs and the ILECs are playing poker with their assets. They have dark fiber. They have trenches that could be very easily, the capacity could be increased with a minimal effect on CEQA, because I think CEQA allows increase in capacity if you're not going to, make major changes. But that's just a comment. I don't expect a response or anything. But I do have some questions, but rather than take up the time here, it's very limited. I'd like to know who to direct them to. Working with the San Joaquin Valley Regional Broadband Consortium, I believe they have the best RFP or RFPQQ, whatever you call it, because we did a search of the wording in the kind of standard format, and we found that there was nothing regarding safety, training, certification, high standards of construction, to add to the durability of the plant. If it's going to be this huge network, then it's got to last 30, 40, 50 years. And so we inserted that language, but that's the only RFP that I see that has that. I don't think it's been done everywhere else. And unless you have something like that, you'd think it would be boilerplate coming from the state through the agencies. Now, the second point is the IIJA does include significant language. It also includes a lot of language regarding engagement and consultation with labor. And the labor forces out there should be part of the meeting to help the agencies and help the whoever's the decision makers are, so that they can plan some of these infrastructure projects. Because otherwise, I think you're relying on certain information, and I think the more, like if you had more of a workshop kind of environment where all those things could be analyzed in a better setting, more transparent setting, I think we might be able to help you. But as long as what's happening with the ISPs continues, then it's going to be a poker game, and it's almost like they're waiting to run out the clock, so that to avoid the federal government clawing back the funds, they'll put the state of California in a position where they have to say, hey, you know what, we'll give you what you want. We really need to get this done. And they'll leverage that time frame and their position and those undisclosed assets. But to finish, I'd just like to say, we appreciate what you're doing. This is a great project, but it needs a little more engagement. Lastly, I designed the project in the West Fresno with several city councils in a collaborative effort. And then I get a call from a city manager saying, you know, I'm getting a contact from somebody from either, I think it was either CalNet or somebody else. He goes, what's this about? And I'm saying, well, you know, we worked on this as a collaborative and I was the one that designed the project, but I'm never consulted with, and they're reaching out to those city councils and they're honestly thinking, you know, is this legit or who are these people?
Thank you,
In a
Mr.
more informal-
Santos. Manya Gilliam, if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, please correct me.
Hi, that's okay. It's Manya Gilliam. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I just have a basic question about the LATA program. I've been watching the website to see when the guidance and grant applications will be available, and it's stated in June. And I know that when they spoke about it, Jonathan Lacrets said possibly June or July for applications. So I'm just wondering if they can clarify the date, or you know what local entities should be doing to look out for that. That was it.
We will take note of that and have somebody get back to you. If you can go ahead and send us an email at the email address noted on the website. Also, for everybody, you can always submit public comment at any time on that same website. The next person is noted. It says LO. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Dr. Lara Ozerin with Clinical Informatics. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I find it very encouraging to see so much progress toward making broadband an effective component of our state's infrastructure. I have one comment and one question. Perhaps I missed them, but I didn't find the specific measurable goals that are driving this effort and your decisions listed on the Middle Mile website. Perhaps they could be added or made more prominent if they are in fact already there. And then I had one related question. From an equity perspective, cost to access this infrastructure is going to be important going forward. Is one goal of this process to enable monthly cost of 100 megabit downstream access to be $30 per month or less? And if not, is it too late to make that a goal? Thank you all.
Thank you. Somebody, if you could submit your question through the email address as just mentioned, somebody will follow up with you. Please go ahead, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you. I actually have a very simple question. I'm kind of playing catch up. Are the grants available to California benefit corporations or just nonprofits?
I'm sorry, Mr. Hughes, we're having a little difficulty hearing you. Would it be possible for you to turn down the speaker volume on your computer?
Yeah, let me do that. Okay. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry, I have a very simple question. Basically, I want to find out, are the grants available to California benefit corporations or just nonprofits?
Again, if you have a question, if you could go ahead and submit it to the address on the website, somebody will follow up with you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Neufeld, please go ahead.
Thank you. I want to thank those working on all this effort to provide broadband for all. I'm representing the Fresno Coalition for Digital Inclusion. I appreciate the concern for engagement with the public and consortia. I would suggest that the grant timelines may be a little bit aggressive relative to consortia and public awareness of these opportunities and readiness for them. I'd also suggest, and I want to affirm both the chair and Assembly Member Wood comment regarding data. From an equity standpoint, we talk about getting data from carriers. I want to suggest that the consumers are not at the table relative to this data. It must be driven by carrier and self-reported data. It must not be driven just by carrier self-reported data, which is what we're generally talking about. It should also include carriers' facilities and the connections to housing, but most importantly, it's got to reflect the experience of consumers. And so I'd ask, what is Middle Mile Advisory and the last mile advisory work doing around understanding that experience? Because otherwise what happens is we don't have the quality in our urban areas of poverty, and we'll consider them underserved and simply walk past those areas when it comes to bringing competitive, high quality, affordable internet in those areas. So I just really ask for further engagement with the coalitions and the public who are ready to properly get those grant applications in, and as well that long-term, I'd advocate for data that actually is honoring the consumer voice and recognizes that their services that are often received are not as advertised.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. If those on the phone have not pressed *9 and they'd like to submit public comment, please go ahead. Madam Chair, is there anybody in person that has changed their mind and would like to make a public comment?
No, not at this time. I want to remind, sometimes we use initials on our banner, but we would still like to, when people do public comment, at least to announce themselves. So just as a reminder.
Please go ahead, Mr. Masak.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. Patrick Messick from Oakland. I want to start just by thanking the state for their ongoing engagement with the community of Oakland and your receptiveness to community voice. It's been really heartening for all members of our community. I'd like to echo, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, from Fresno. The timeline on the grants are rapidly approaching. So just some consideration for opportunities to raise awareness about these upcoming grant opportunities and to streamline the grant process as much as possible would be greatly appreciated. And I just want to also thank Assemblymember Woods for emphasizing the importance of granular data. We know that here in Oakland, ISP self-reported data is wildly overstated, and we look forward to the opportunity to review the granular data presented by ISPs. I do struggle with the argument that the ISPs are concerned with consumer data. You can go on to incumbent ISPs right now, search an address, and they won't only tell you if service is available, but whether that address currently has service with that provider. So to say that they're willing to make it available on a public website, but not within like encrypted state processes is very hard for me to understand. And I'm wondering if they have another motive for not wanting to disclose that data. So just thanks again for the ongoing engagement. And I look forward to open dialogue and transparent data so that we can serve Oakland and all the urban cores that have all too often been overlooked. Thanks again.
Thank you. I have tried to unmute the next person, and I do not want to mispronounce your name. I'm going to try, and apologies in advance. Sally Panala.
Thank you. This is Vasavi Panala. This meeting is the first time I'm attending, and it's very informative to know what's happening. We are consultants and trying to help a city in Contra Costa County to apply for a middle mile grant program, a federal grant funding. And that's the first time we knew about this committee and then what's happening. So it's just a question that when a city or a local entity applies for this kind of grant funding, is there any collaboration or support that can be expected from this program, or it's a kind of a separate track or standalone effort that local entities take up?
Thank you. Mr. Masak, I can't tell if you still have your hand up or you have another comment.
Apologies, I meant to lower my hand.
It appears we don't have any more comments, public comments for today, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And as Jules had reminded, if you did have questions, which many of you did, please go ahead and submit them to the email address that Jules had provided. We will make sure that someone gets back to you. I would also like to give an opportunity for the committee members to also make additional comments before we close, because there was a lot of information shared. So is there any additional comments? All right, I don't see any. I just always want to give everyone an opportunity. So in closing, I want to thank the committee members the presenters and the public who contributed to a great session today. The Middle Mile is an exciting project, and I look forward to continued collaboration with everyone and seeing the progress that is going to happen over the next several years. Our next meeting is scheduled for Friday, July 22nd, 2022. Thank you. We're looking forward to see you in July. Hopefully it won't be triple digit weather. And with that, we'll go ahead and our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.